Hey, remember the time Zurn made some Eljer knockoffs and made them worse in the process? Well, here is one of them. This is Zurn's knockoff of the second generation Eljer signature wall-hung toilet. That's obviously not what it's technically called. It's usually referred to by a model code. When I find it, I will post it here in the video. For some reason in the 2000s, Zurn thought it would be a good idea to bring over some of Eljer's fixtures. Some include the second generation floor-mounted Eljer signature and even the wall-hung version, which was also its second generation. But they redesigned it and somehow made it a lot worse than it originally was. Or at least the wall-hung version, that is. The second generation floor-mounted one was already pretty awful, but I don't think it will be much different than that. But this one is a completely different story. This thing sucks, and we're going to explore why this knockoff is terrible. The overall design, while you would think would look similar to the second generation wall-hung Eljer signature, is actually a little bit different. As you can see, it actually looks a little bit more normal, but at the same time looks pretty generic as well. On the second generation wall-hung Eljer signatures, it had this weird dip, and it just looks bizarre, but the outer design was slightly redesigned to look less bizarre. Now there are some other differences compared to the second generation Eljer signature wall-hung toilet. One being the trapway opening. As you can see, it's more like a weird squared off shape. It almost looks like a trapezoid, but slightly deformed. Remember when I brought up in the second generation Eljer signature review that the deformed Eljer signatures kind of look like trapezoids? Well, this is kind of close enough, except this one is a little bit more square. And also a major difference is that front bump in the middle there for the channel passages is also removed and redone completely. Now let's take a look at a flush. The flush on this particular version is a lot different compared to the second generation Eljer signature wall-hung. While the Eljer signature wall-hung swirls, this one flushes straight down. It's also a lot, and I mean a lot louder than the second generation wall-hung signature, which was already pretty noisy, but this one is irritatingly loud. Compared to the mixed quality control of the second generation Eljer signature wall-hung, this knockoff version is outright terrible in its quality control. One thing being the pulling factor is pretty crap. It shreds a lot, and it leaves stuff behind a lot. It's honestly kind of ridiculous. A lot of people have problems with that, supposedly, with the actual original version, but this version is a lot worse. Performance is also a little bit worse, I've noticed. These things tend to clog a lot more compared to its original version of the signature, which has alright performance, but nothing too out of the ordinary. This is definitely a little bit worse. Would I say terrible? Not really, but definitely could have been a lot better. Now you get to see its quality control at its worst. Let's have a look at this awful ball rinse. While some rim jets are angled, others are not. And as you can see, some of the ball rinse doesn't even cover some areas on the back rim. Not only that, it takes a long time to finally kick in the ball rinse, which tends to leave a lot of stuff behind, especially on the back rim. This thing is 1.6 Kingston levels of awful. Honestly, scratch that. 1.6 Eljer Auburn levels of awful ball rinse. It's embarrassing. If you thought the second generation Eljer signature wall-hung toilet was problematic, well, let me tell you something. This version is so much worse. It has all the design elements almost, with some slight redesigns, but it offers a lot of terrible qualities as well, and it's just an outright terrible toilet overall. But let's grade it. The overall design of this Eljer knockoff actually is a little bit different. Now, some older versions kind of look more similar to that of the second generation Eljer signature wall-hung toilet, but this particular design here is a little bit different, but it doesn't make it any less generic. it gets a 5. You thought the quality control on the 2nd gen Eljer signature wall hung was mixed. This, on the other hand, has terrible quality control. So, remember the mixed bag shredding quality of the 2nd gen wall mounted signature? Well, that's worse. Oh, let's also add some terrible balance to the factor, and the fact that the jets don't kick in until later. There is so much wrong with this toilet, and we'll discuss that as we go on, but the quality control gets a 2. The design consistency is mostly fine. It's good for what it is, but considering that it's a knockoff, is that really saying much? It gets an 8. The trap weight is about the same as the 2nd generation Eljer signature wall hung toilet, except it's a little bit more wider, but besides that, I kind of noticed that these perform a little bit worse, but to be fair, it's about the same as its original version, so I give it a 6 as well. So, let's start off with one of the major problems, the flush. It is so much worse. The 2nd gen Eljer signature wall mounted toilet actually had a very alright flush. It was swirly and a little bit different, even though it was pretty noisy. But Zurn decided to make it flush straight down and a lot more louder, for whatever reason. The flush is so much worse on this, it gets a 3. So, you thought the pulling factor was mixed on the 2nd gen wall mounted signature? Well, get ready because it is 10 times worse on this. The pulling factor is awful. This thing shreds like no tomorrow. It leaves a lot of stuff behind. So, it gets a 2. I feel like the performance is a little bit worse. Not too terribly bad, but not as good as its original design. I give it a 5. Oh, the ball rinse. It's awful. It's 1.6 Eljer Auburn levels of awful. This thing takes a while for its ball rinse to even kick in, just like the 1.6 Kingston and Auburn. So, this has the same problem where the ball rinse is barely applied. It struggles on the front and back rims a lot. It is pathetic. And it gets a 2. Survivability is definitely a lot worse. From all the quality aspects and so many downgrades to this, it gets a 4. So let's talk about the overall value of this toilet. If there is any at all, which by the way, there is really not a lot. This thing is a shameless knockoff of an Eljer product, but it's Zurn's design and quality control that brings it down a lot more. You see, the original 2nd generation Eljer signature wall hang had some issues, like some quality control being mixed and the pulling factor being mixed as well. Well, let's make all that worse with a shameless knockoff that does nothing right. The flush, so much worse. The pulling factor, so much worse. The ball rinse, don't even get me started on it. There is nothing done right with this toilet. Everything is worse in every way, shape, or form. And stripped it down to this pathetic piece of garbage that is this shameless knockoff. And it's pathetic, honestly. Overall, I give it a 2. The final score of this pathetic knockoff is a 39 out of 100. It's one thing to make a horrible design, but it's another thing if you take an original design that was very interesting and strip it of all of its interestingness, and you're left with this lifeless and pathetic excuse of a husk. There is not one redeeming factor about this toilet, but outside of consistency being a little bit better, which really isn't saying much. This thing is nothing but shameless. I wasn't joking about its awful ball runs, was I?